There was a time when my long exposure shots were just a blurry mess. I would try, I would fail, and I would wonder, how do people get those stunning long exposure shots? I figured out that most will use a tripod and a slow shutter speed. And I did that. I failed a lot in the beginning, but eventually I got 1 or 2 nice shots. But then I stumbled upon a problem. When traveling or shooting quickly on the go, I couldn't always have a tripod with me. So how could I take those nice long exposure shots if the only means I have is my hands? Is it even possible? Today I want to take you through my journey, the lessons I've learned, and 6 game-changing principles that help me take those nice long exposure shots handheld on the go. I remember the first time when I tried shooting long exposures handheld. I dialed a slow shutter speed, pointed my camera towards a bustling street, and I clicked. The result? A shaky, overexposed mess. I had no control over my composition and the entire frame felt like an accident. I remember scrolling through my camera screen feeling frustrated. Every photo was worse than the last. But I kept going, I experimented, I adjusted my settings, and slowly I started seeing some improvement. The journey was frustrating, but it was also exhilarating because with every failed shot I ended up learning something new. The breakthrough was not immediate, but I knew I was onto something. Then one night everything clicked. I was in the subway watching the trains rush past. The station lights flickered. The energy of the city pulsed all around me. I planted my feet firmly on the ground, steadied my breath, and clicked. When I reviewed the image, something had changed. The train was a perfect streak of motion, but the metal frame next to me remained sharp. The balance between blur and stability was there. That's when I realized mastering handheld long exposure shots, it's not just about my settings. It's about control, it's about patience, and most importantly, it's about confidence. If you're enjoying the video so far, hit the like button and consider subscribing with the bell. Let's see now the 6 lessons that completely changed my handheld long exposure photography. Although camera settings are not the only thing that you have to do right, they are at the core of every great long exposure shot. Shutter speed is simply how long your shutter remains open, allowing light to hit the sensor. For handheld long exposure shots, I usually keep it between 1 to 25 and 2 seconds, depending on how much motion blur I want to have in my image. But of course there are cases that I might leave it open for even longer. Aperture determines how wide the lens opens to regulate how much light will hit the sensor. To keep details sharp and prevent overexposure, I usually set it between f8 and f13. ISO controls my camera's sensor sensitivity. To minimize noise or overexposure, I keep it somewhere between 100 and 640 depending on the available light. But here is the challenge. On a bright sunny day, using slow shutter speed lets in too much light, resulting in overexposed images. That's where a neutral density or ND filter comes in. Think of it as sunglasses for your camera. It reduces the intensity of light, allowing you to slow your shutter speed without blowing out your highlights. Using an ND filter for daylight long exposure photography was a game changer for me. And for focusing, I prefer manual focusing because long exposure shots are too unpredictable. In fact, I found that it is better if I pre-focus on a subject of interest and then wait for a train to pass or my scene to unfold. Movement is the enemy. I learned to anchor myself, elbow stacked, body firm, and breathe controlled. Every tiny movement counts, so I practiced standing like a rock. The steadier I was, the sharper my subject became. If I was in a crowded area, I would lean against a wall or a lamppost, anything to steady myself. Even pressing my elbows against my ribs helped. I had to become my own tripod in a sense. A steady subject makes all the difference. Whether it's a person waiting for a train, a parked car, or a street sign, having one sharp element against the backdrop of motion can give your photo an intentional feel. I started scouting my locations, looking for elements that could be my anchors in the chaos. Not all cameras have IBIS, but if yours does, turn it on. It will make a huge difference. I learned this the hard way back in the day with my Sony 6400, which lacks stabilization. Without it, I had to be extra careful, minimizing shake, steadying my hands against walls or railings, and perfecting my stance. Although this video focuses on handheld shots, if you have the opportunity, use any steady surface around you to stabilize your image. Long exposure is unpredictable. I used to take one shot and hope for the best. But the real trick, take multiple shots. Each frame captures movement differently, and the best balance between sharpness and motion blur can be hidden in the second or the third frame. I remember locking my exposure in the subway and actually firing 5 consecutive shots. In front of me there was a beautiful sharp mirror reflecting the movement of trains and people passing by. One shot wouldn't be enough to get it just right. I had to take multiple, and in the end, after a lot of trial and error, I managed to capture the image I imagined. At first, I obsessed over keeping something sharp, but then I realized, what if I embrace the blur? What if I move the camera intentionally? That's when I started experimenting with motion painting, moving slightly midway through a long exposure shot to create a dynamic, almost dreamlike effect. It changed my entire perspective on long exposure, but even with my steady long exposure shots, I am often okay with a little bit of movement and motion blur. In fact, it often enhances the photo, acting life and character through motion. Take this shot for example. I am back in the train photographing a girl sitting on the bench, absorbed in her phone while waiting for her train. On the right, a train passes by and my long exposure turns it into a beautiful streak of motion and light. The girl ended up being a little blurry, but do I mind? Not at all. In fact, I love the result. It feels like a genuine motion in time rather than a static snapshot. Looking back now, I can see how far I've come with long exposure photography. From shaky overexposed mistakes to photos that make sense. This journey has taught me a lot more than just technique. It taught me patience, persistence, and the power of learning through failure. Handheld, long exposure photography forces you to slow down, to be intentional with your compositions, but accept that long exposure street photography is unpredictable and it can end up being a lot more than what you expected. Because with this technique, we do not just take a photo, we're capturing a continuous feeling of the moment, the movement and the rhythm of the streets. So if you want to take handheld long exposure shots and you are struggling, don't give up. Keep experimenting, keep shooting, and most importantly, keep learning. And if you're afraid to start, just start. The best shots aren't just captured. They are created through trial, error, and persistence. I would love to hear whether you have any other tips or stories with long exposure photography. Let me know down in the comments. Now, if you want to see how a method could instantly improve your photographic composition, click and watch this video next. That was all for today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I will see you on the streets. Bye bye.